Okay, so pag-uusapan po natin ang walk through the Bible, take a walk, change the world. Ito po ay isang bagay na pwede po nating alamin, mga pag-aaralan po natin from the Word of God. Sa Bible, ang dami po nating matutunan kung aaralin po natin. Kaya sa pagkakataong ito ay pag-aaralan po natin, tuloy po nating saliksikin ang ating Biblia. Marami po tayo na mga matuklasan o matutunan. Kaya aralin lang po natin mga kapatid ang salita ng Diyos. At katulad po ng palagi kong binabanggit, ito po ay isang pag-aaral lamang, pwedeng i-adapt, pwedeng ituro kung ano ang mga lessons na pwede nating pag-aaralan dito sa salita ng Diyos. So, umpisa na po natin ang ating pag-aaral tungkol po sa Biblia. Pag-usapan po natin ang tungkol sa fear versus faith. So, ito po ay comparison or contrast David and Goliath. May mga pag-aaralan po tayo, principles from the scriptures. Actually, ang dami po nating matutunan dito under the issue, under the time past, but now and ages to come. So, sa pagkakataong ito po ay pag-uusapan po natin ang time ni David and Goliath. Fear versus faith. So David and Goliath is a story of contrast. So the real contrast is not David versus Goliath, but David versus Saul. So ito po yung aaralin po natin. David and Goliath is a story of contrast, but the real contrast is not David versus Goliath, but David versus Saul. So the real contrast, Saul faces Goliath with fear. Saul faces Goliath with fear. Kung naalala niyo ang story ni David and Goliath, so si Saul ay hinaharap niya si Goliath with fear. Kaya nga na-paralyze ang bayang Israel dahil yung kanilang hari ay natakot kay Goliath. And David faces Goliath with faith. So ito po ang kaibahan sa dalawang ito. Si David ay hinarap niya si Goliath with faith. So sa pananampalataya ng ating Panginoon, kaya nakayanan niyang harapin ito si Goliath. Pero si Saul, dahil sa takot, ay hindi po niya talagang hinarap si Goliath nung time na ito. So in 1 Samuel 17:1-3, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Epesh, Dammim, between Soko and Azekah. Verse 2 and 3, Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill, and the Israelites another with the valley between them. Then in verse 4, in 1 Samuel 17, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze, weighing 5,000 shekels. Verses 6 to 7, on his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Verse 8, Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Palestine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me." Ito po yung hamon ni Goliath. Hinahamon niya ang mga Israel or yung mga servant ni Saul na sabi niya, pumili kayo at harapin ako. Yun po yung sinasabi ni Goliath at ito ay paulit-ulit niyang hinahamon ang Israel. Next verse, if he is able to fight and kill me, ito po yung sabi niya, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. So the Palestinians said, this day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other. Yun po ang kasunduan. Mayroon silang agreement or sinabi ni Goliath, itong agreement na ito na regarding nga po sa kanyang hamon na magiging, kung matatalo siya sa labanan, ay magiging servant po sila sa bayang Israel. So, ganun din, kung sila naman ang matatalo sa labanan, ay magiging servant po sila. At ito ang laging sabi niya, give me a man and let us fight each other. So, ganun po ang laging sinasabi ni Goliath sa time na ito. So, everyone has a Goliath. Who and what is your Goliath? Kasi ito po yung nagiging problem sa bayang Israel. So, problem ng bayang Israel ay si Goliath. Kaya yung sinasabi ito, everyone has a Goliath, and what is your Goliath? And then, 1 Samuel 17, ito po yung response, 11 to 27. On hearing the Palestine's words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So, nung narinig nila yon, yung sinasabi ng isang Palestinians, nangyari po sa kay Saul at saka yung Israel ay natatakot po sila. So, now David was the son of the Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Saul's time, he was old and well advanced in years. Dito po lumabas itong pangalang David, anak ni Jesse. Marami po silang magkakapatid. So dito po, alamin pa po natin. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. So the firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, so the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Si David ay hindi po siya na-describe dito na warrior. Ang kanyang mga kapatid, yun po ay mga soldiers na sumusuporta kay King Saul. So for 40 days, the Palestine came forward every morning and evening and took his stand. So 40 days, araw-araw ito na hinahamon ang bayang Israel So in verse 17, now Jesus said to his son David, take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Ito si David na youngest ay napag-utusan na magdala ng baon doon sa kanyang mga kapatid doon sa camp. Ito po, tuloy nating alamin po ang story. Take along these 10 Jews to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are and bring back some assurance from them. And they are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Palestines. Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. And he reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Palestinians were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his thing with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Palestine champion from God, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Verse 24, when the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. In verse 24, when the Israelites saw the man, Goliath, what happened to the Israel? They all ran from him in great fear. So matindi ang takot nila dahil ito si Goliath ay champion. Kung baga, talagang siya ay veteranong mandirigma. Kaya natakot itong ang bayang Israel. Verse 25, now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? And he comes out to defy Israel. So the king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his father's family from tax in Israel. Ito po yung nagiging condition ngayon ni King Saul. Kung magbibigay siya ng reward kung sinong makakapatay kay Goliath. At may mga promise po si King Saul, may mga promises siya kung sino ang makakapatay kay Goliath. So David asked the man standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Palestine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And who is this uncircumcised Palestine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Verse 27, they repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what will be done for the man who kills him. Yun po ang information na nakuha ni David nung siya ay nasa camp. Nag-investigate siya at nakakuha siya ng information patungkol kay Goliath. Ayan. So, alamin pa po natin. Saul is paralyzed by fear. Tandaan po natin, sa time na ito ay si King Saul ang dapat mangunguna sa bayang Israel. Pero sa puntong ito, nung dumating ito si Goliath, Saul is paralyzed. Bakit po? Dahil sa kanyang takot, hindi niya kayang harapin ito si Goliath. David is energized by faith. So kung si Saul ay paralyzed by fear, si David naman ay energized by faith. So hindi siya natatakot nung narinig niya ang hamon ni Goliath, kundi siya naman ay na-energize by faith. Ayan, hindi katulad ng hari ni King Saul na siya ay natakot kaya na-paralyze ang buong Israel sa time na ito ay paralyzed dahil sa takot. Saul is concerned about what? His life. Kaya siya ay nagtatago, concerned siya sa kanyang buhay. Kaya ang iniharap niya ay ang kanyang mga army, kanyang mga soldiers, pero siya wala doon. Siya ay nagtatago lang. Saul is concerned about his life. But while David is concerned about God's honor. Ito po ang kaibahan sa dalawang ito. Kung si Saul, ang concern lang niya ang kanyang buhay, pero si David ay ang honor ng ating Panginoon. Kaya tandaan po natin na itong mga ang bayang Israel na pinili ng Diyos ay hinahamon ni Goliath. So nawawala yung honor ng ating Panginoon dahil sila ay natakot. Pero ito po ang alamin natin. David is concerned about God's honor. In 1 Samuel 17:28 to 33, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the man, he burned with anger. So nagalit yung kanyang kapatid at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is." Yun yung sinasabi ng kanyang kapatid. So walang tiwala ang kanyang kapatid. Bakit nandoon ito yung kanyang youngest brother? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. Yung sabi niya, you came down only to watch the battle? Wow. So galit ang kanyang oldest brother na pumunta ito si David, youngest brother, at ina-underestimate niya kung ano ang magagawa ng kanyang kapatid. Verse 29 to 31, now, what have I done? Yung sinabi ni David, can't I even speak? Verse 30, he then turned away to someone else. So, ang nangyari, pumunta siya sa iba and brought up the same matter. And the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. So, ganun po ang talagang nag-investigate po ito si David kung ano ba talaga ang nangyari at ano ang dapat gawin. So, yun po, nalaman ni David. Now, in verse 32 to 33, David said to Saul, kasi nga pumunta nga, gusto niyang talagang makita at malaman, David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Palestine. Your servant will go and fight him. Yan po yung sinabi ni David kay King Saul. Siya na lang ang makipaglaban. Kaya anong sabi ni Saul? You are not able to go out against this Palestine and fight him. You are only a boy. So, walang tiwala din ito si King Saul kay David, and he has been fighting man from his youth. So, diniscouraged pa ito si David. Sabi niya, you're just only a boy or bata ka pa. Itong si Goliath ay he was talagang fighter since na siya ay bata pa. So talagang matinding mandirigma ito si Goliath. Talagang problem ito sa kanila sa time na ito. Pero alamin pa po natin, faith is a great threat to those who are controlled by fear. Totoo naman. Faith is a great threat to those who are controlled by fear. Katulad ni King Saul, he was controlled by fear. So wala doon yung kanyang paniniwala dahil ang nasa kanya ay takot. Then Eliab questions David's motives. Isa pa yung kanyang kapatid ay talagang tinatanong kung ano bang motibo niya na siya ay nandoon. Saul questions David's abilities. Kaya dito po talagang sa kanilang interpretation ay talagang minaliit nila si David. Ang kanyang kapatid, ini-question siya kung ano yung motibo niya. Si Saul, kung anong abilidad niya. So, alamin pa po natin yung nangyayari sa time na ito when Saul and Goliath na nagkaroon ng problem. So, alamin pa po natin kung ano ang nangyayari. Kaya dito sa 1 Samuel 17:34-40, but David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Ito po yung experience. Parang tinatanong ni King Saul kung ano ba ang background sa war. Ito si David na nag-volunteer na siyang makipaglaban. So ito po yung kanyang sinasabi na siya ay nagbabantay ng mga tupa at kung may mga wild animals, ito ay kanyang pinatay, prinotektahan niya ang mga tupa. So yun po yung ipinaliwanag niya kay King Saul. 36. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Palestine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. Wow, ang tindi ng pananampalataya ni David. Katulad din itong Palestine, ito si Goliath ay magiging katulad din ng mga animals or mga wild beasts na kanyang pinatay, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me, yung sinasabi ni David, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Palestine. Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. 38-39. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. So, yun po ang talagang binigyan siya ng gear, battle gear. Ito si David kasi yun nga ay makipagdigmaan siya, makipaglaban kay Goliath. So, sinubukan niya isinuot itong protective gear, pero alamin natin kung nagamit ba ito ni David. I cannot go in this, sabi ni David. He said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them up. Hindi niya ginamit. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 small stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Palestine. So yun po ang kaniyang ginawa. Kung ano yung dati niyang ginagawang nakipaglaban sa mga wild beast, ito din po ang kaniyang ginawa. So hindi niya isinuot ang battle gear na ipinasuot niya kay King Saul. So yun po ang ginawa nga niya. So alamin pa po natin God's faithfulness in the past. So in the time past, God's faithfulness in the time past is the basis for our faith in the present. So may lesson tayo na matutunan in the past. God's faithfulness nun sa past din, sa panahon nila noon, ay pwedeng maging halintulad po sa ating pananampalataya in this present time. So God prepared both Saul and David to fight Goliath. So inihanda ng ating Panginoon itong si Saul at David to fight Goliath. Saul forgets God's past faithfulness. Saul forgets God's past faithfulness. While David remembers God's past faithfulness. Yun po ang kaibahan na itong dalawang ito ay inihanda ng ating Panginoon to fight Goliath. Ang kay Saul ay nakalimutan niya yung faithfulness ng ating Panginoon. Unlike David ay naalala niya. 1 Samuel 17:41-52. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. So, ganun ang ginawa ng Palestine na ito. Dahil nakita nila na ang bata lang ang kakalaban sa kanya. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you came at me with sticks?" And the Palestine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So yun po yung talagang mga sinasabi. Ayan, naghahamunan sila dito. So David said to the Palestine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come." Yung sinabi na ni David, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Ayan ang sinasabi ni David. Dala niya ang pangalan ng Panginoon. Hindi siya nakipaglaban sa sarili niya, kundi nakipaglaban siya kasama ang Panginoon. Kung si Goliath ang nakipaglaban siya, with sword, spear, and javelin, yun po ang ginagamit niya. Pero si David, nakipaglaban siya kasama ang Panginoong Diyos. Verse 46, "This day the Lord will hand you over to me," sabi ni David, "and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Palestine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." So, ang tindi ng sinasabi ni David by faith, yung sinasabi with confidence. Sinasabi niya ito dahil alam niya na ang Diyos ay panig sa kanya at nakipaglaban siya kasama ang ating Panginoon. Verse 47, "All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give all of you into our hands." Ayan. Then, Saul views Goliath as his battle. Saul views Goliath as his battle. Yun po yung kanyang perspective ni King Saul na tinitignan kasi niya na ilaban niya ito. While David views Goliath as God's battle. Kaya, hindi natatakot si David dahil ang labanan ito ay hindi between David and Goliath, kundi God's battle. Instrument lang ito si David. Pero si Saul ay tinitignan kasi niya na laban niya ito kaya natakot siya. Verse 48 to 49, as the Palestine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Palestine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So, ang nangyari ay natalo si Goliath. Ayan, nakipaglaban ito si David with faith. Verse 50 to 51. So David triumphed over the Palestine with a sling and a stone without a sword in his hand. He struck down the Palestine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. So he took hold of the Palestine sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Palestinians saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. So nung namatay ang kanilang hero, yung kanilang inaniniwalaan, so lahat ng Palestine ay natakot at tumakbo sila. Verse 52, Then the men of Israel and Judah soared forward with a shout and pursued the Palestine to the entrance of Gath and to the gates of Ekron. Their dead were strewn along the Sha'arim road to Gath and Ekron. Fear and faith are both contagious. Fear and faith are both contagious. Saul's fear causes others to retreat. So, ganun po. Yung fear, dahil ito nga ay fear and faith are both contagious, ito po, yung Saul's fear, yung takot ni Saul, ang dahilan na ang iba ay mag-retreat. Kasi natakot din sila. While David, faith causes others to advance. So kung faith, ito na ang faith ni David ay yun ang dahilan na yung iba ay nag-advance, hindi po sila nag-retreat katulad dito po kay Saul. Dahil sa takot, mag-surrender na lang sila. Dahil sa takot, ayaw na nila. Pero dahil sa pananampalataya, sila po ay nag-advance. For you to conquer your Goliath by faith, what's the first step? God wants you to take. Yun pa, ito po ay may lesson po tayo na matutunan dito sa time ni David and then Saul. Sa time ni David and Saul, hindi kasi dito ang issue si Goliath. Hindi po ang issue dito yung si David at si Goliath. Yung takot ni Saul, ang issue dito ay David and Saul. Yung takot ni Saul and then yung pananampalataya ni David nung harapin nila si Goliath. Kaya kung pansinin po natin mga kapatid, dito po sa ating pag-aaral ay may mga lessons po tayo from the time past. So applying this principles in the But Now program. So sa panahon po natin ngayon ay normal na mayroon tayong tinatawag na takot. Pero katulad ni David, sa pananampalataya, dahil sa kanyang pananampalataya ay hindi po siya natatakot, hindi po siya nag-give up. Kaya ulitin ko, ang napakahalaga ang mag-aral, magsasaliksik sa salita ng ating Panginoon, na sa pag-aaral ay may maitutulong po sa atin, lalo na sa panahon po natin ngayon. Kaya tandaan po natin na marami po tayong dapat aralin, alamin upang mas lalong marami tayong mai-share, mai-contribute sa ating mga kaibigan at mga kapatid sa ating Panginoon. Okay, wag lang nating kalimutan pala na mag-subscribe, mag-share, mag-like sa ating programa. At kung may mga katanungan po kayo, pwede po kayong mag-comments or mag-email ng mga questions at aralin po natin at sabay-sabay po nating saliksik ang salita ng ating Panginoon. At maraming salamat sa ating mga subscribers, mga viewers. Maraming salamat sa inyo at hanggang dito lang po ang ating pagsasaliksik at abangan po natin ang iba pang mga kaalaman na ating pag-aaralan. Maraming salamat and God bless.